A blessed day to everyone. I would like to present my literary analysis on the literary piece entitled Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton from African literature, specifically from the country of South Africa. About the author, Alan Stewart Patton was born on January 11, 1903 and died on April 12, 1988. He was a South African author and an anti-apartheid activist. Patton was born in Pietermaritzburg in the colony of Natal, now South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province, the son of a civil servant. After attending Maritzburg College, he earned a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Natal in his hometown, followed by a diploma in education. After graduation, Patton worked as a teacher, first at the Exopo High School and subsequently at Maritzburg College. While at Exopo, he met Dory Francis Lusted. They were married in 1928 and remained together until her death from emphysema in 1967. Their life together is documented in Patton's book Kontakyon for You Departed, published in 1969. They had two sons, Jonathan and David. In 1969, Patton married Ann Hopkins. This marriage lasted until Patton's death. He served as the principal of DF Club, Reformatory for Young Native African Offenders from 1935 to 1949, where he introduced controversial progressive reforms. Patton volunteered for service during World War II but was refused. After the war, he took a trip at his own expense to tour correctional facilities across the world. He toured Scandinavia, England, continental Europe, Canada, and the United States. During his time in Norway, he began work on his seminal novel, Cry the Beloved Country, which he completed throughout his journey, finishing it on Christmas Eve in San Francisco in 1946. There, he met Aubrey and Marigold Burns, who read his manuscript and found a publisher, the editor Maxwell Perkins, noted for editing novels of Ernest Hemingway and Thomas Wolfe, guided Patton's first novel through publication with Scribners. Published numerous books in the 1950s and became wealthy from their sales. On the 11th of January 2018, a Google Doodle honored the author on what would have been his 115th birthday. His other works, Cry the Beloved Country has been filmed twice in 1951 and 1995 and was the basis for the Broadway musical Lost in the Stars, adaptation by Maxwell Anderson and music by Kurt Will. Patton's second and third novels, Too Late, The Phalarope in 1953 and But Your Land is Beautiful in 1981, and his short stories Tales from a Troubled Land in 1961, all deal with the same racial themes that concerned the author in his first novel. But Your Land is Beautiful was built on parallel life stories, letters, speeches, news and records, and legal proceedings, and mixed fictional and real life characters. The historical background of The Cry, the Beloved Country. Alan Patton's impassioned novel about a black man's country under white man's law is a work of searing beauty. It was published in 1948 to overwhelming international acclaim. At the time of the author's death, in 1988, more than 15 million copies of the novel had been sold, and it had been published in 20 different languages. In Patton's native South Africa, however, praise for Cry the Beloved Country remained muted, and the novel's objective take on the problems of racial inequality in South Africa created much controversy. Nonetheless, Patton's reputation as one of the South Africa's greatest writers remained secure, though his subsequent novels were praised by critics but failed to generate the same excitement as Cry the Beloved Country. Cry the Beloved Country is set in this tense and fragile society where the breathtaking beauty of the nation's natural landscape is tainted by the fears of its people. And yet, the message of the novel is one of hope. Characters such as Stephen Kumalo, James Jarvis, and Theophilus M. Simango reveal a potential for goodness in humankind and can diffuse hatred, overcome fear, and take the first steps necessary for mending a broken nation. There are some allusions and references to other works in the Cry the Beloved Country. The most evident are the names Patton gives to the characters. Absalom, the son of Stephen Kumalo, is named for the son of King David, who rose against his father in rebellion. Also, in the New Testament book of Acts, Stephen was a martyr who underwent death by stoning rather than stop declaring the things he believed. The Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts are written to Theophilus, which is Greek for friend of God. In the novel, Absalom requests that his son to be named Peter, the name of one of Jesus' disciples. Among Peter's better known traits is certain impulsiveness. Also, after Christ's arrest, he denied knowing Jesus 3 times and later wept in grief over this. After the resurrection, Peter renewed his commitment to Christ and to spreading the gospel. All that suggests Absalom's final repentance and his commitment to the faith of his father. In another allusion, Arthur Jarvis is described as having a large collection of books on Abraham Lincoln, and the writings of Lincoln are featured several times in the novel. Patton describes Arthur's son as having characteristics similar to his when he was a child, which may allude to the resurrection of Christ. The elements of fiction. Let's start with the plot. The exposition. Here's the story. During apartheid in South Africa, the separation of blacks and whites grew out of white racism. In the remote village of Endotsheni in the Natal province of eastern South Africa, the Reverend Stephen Komalo receives a letter from a fellow minister summoning him to Johannesburg. He is needed there, the letter says, to help his sister Gertrude, who the letter says has fallen ill. Kumalo undertakes the difficult and expensive journey to the city in the hopes of aiding Gertrude and of finding his son Absalom, who traveled to Johannesburg from Endotsheni and never returned. In Johannesburg, Kumalo is warmly welcomed by MC Mangu, the priest who sent him the letter, and given comfortable lodging by Miss Liteve, a Christian woman who feels that helping others is her duty. Kumalo visits Gertrude, who is now a prostitute and liquor seller, and persuades her to come back to Endotsheni with her young son. A more difficult quest follows when Kumalo and MC Mango begin searching the labyrinthine metropolis of Johannesburg for Absalom. They visit Kumalo's brother, John, who has become a successful businessman and politician, and he directs them to the factory where his son and Absalom once worked together. One clue leads to another, and as Kumalo travels from place to place, he begins to see the gaping racial and economic divisions that are threatening to split his country. Eventually, Kumalo discovers that his son has spent time in a reformatory and that he has gotten a girl pregnant. Rising action. Meanwhile, the newspapers announced that Arthur Jarvis, a prominent white crusader for racial justice, has been murdered in his home by a gang of burglars. Kumalo and MC Mango learn that the police are looking for Absalom, and Kumalo's worst suspicions are confirmed when Absalom is arrested for the murder. Absalom confesses to the crime but states that two others, including John's son, Matthew, aided him and that he did not intend to murder Jarvis. With the help of friends, Kumalo obtains a lawyer for Absalom and attempts to understand what his son was become. John, however, makes arrangements for his own son's defense, even though this split will worsen Absalom's case. When Kumalo tells Absalom's pregnant girlfriend what has happened, she is saddened by the news, but she joyfully agrees to his proposal that she marry his son and return to Endotsheni as Kumalo's daughter-in-law. Meanwhile, in the hills above Endotsheni, Arthur Jarvis' father, James Jarvis, tends his bountiful land and hopes for rain. The local police bring him news of his son's death and he leaves immediately for Johannesburg with his wife. In an attempt to come to terms with what has happened, Jarvis reads his son's articles and speeches on social inequality and begins a racial reconsideration of his prejudices. The climax. He and Kumalo meet for the first time by accident, and after Kumalo has recovered from his shock, He expresses sadness and regrets Jarvis' loss. Both men attend Absalom's trial, a fairly straightforward process that ends with the death penalty for Absalom and an acquittal for the two other defendants. Kumalo arranges for Absalom to marry the girl who bears his child, and they bid farewell. On the morning of his departure, Kumalo rouses his new family to bring them back to Endocheni, only to find that Gertrude has disappeared. The falling action. Kumalo is now deeply aware of how his people have lost the tribal structure that once held them together and returns to his village troubled by the situation. It turns out that James Jarvis has been having similar thoughts. Arthur Jarvis' young son befriends Kumalo. As the young boy and the old man become acquainted, James Jarvis becomes increasingly involved with helping the struggling village. He donates milk at first and then makes plans for a dam and hires an agricultural expert to demonstrate newer, less devastating farming techniques. When Jarvis' wife dies, Kumalo and his congregation send a wreath to express their sympathy. Just as the bishop is on the verge of transferring Kumalo, Jarvis sends a note of thanks for the wreath and offers to build the congregation a new church, and Kumalo is permitted to stay in his parish. The resolution. On the evening before his son's execution, Kumalo goes into the mountains to await the appointed time in solitude. On the way, he encounters Jarvis, and the two men speak of the village, of lost sons, and of Jarvis' bright young grandson, whose innocence and honesty have impressed both men. When Kumalo is alone, he weeps for his son's death and clasps his hands in prayer as dawn breaks over the valley. The characters. We have Stephen Kumalo, a 60-year-old Zulu priest, the father of Absalom, who attempts to find his family in Johannesburg and later to reconstruct the disintegrating state of his village. He is the protagonist and moral compass of the novel. He is a quiet, humble man with a strong faith in God and a clear sense of right and wrong. An Anglican priest, Kumalo cares for his parishioners and presides over the modest church of the village he calls home. Theophilus M. Simangu, a priest from Johannesburg who helps Kumalo find his son Absalom and his sister Gertrude. He stays supporting and helpful most of the time. He is humble, honest, and gentle through most of the story. John Kumalo, Stephen's brother, who denies the tribal validity and becomes a spokesman for the new racial movement in the city. A former carpenter, he feels that he does not need the church because religion has not solved South Africa's problems. Stephen decides to find his brother and ask him why he never wrote. Absalom Kumalo, Stephen's son who left home to look for Stephen's sister, Gertrude, and who murders Arthur Jarvis and is later hanged for the crime. Gertrude Kumalo, the young sister of Stephen, who becomes a prostitute in Johannesburg and leads a dissolute life. James Jarvis, a wealthy landowner whose son Arthur is murdered. He realizes the guilt of white residents in such crimes and forgives the Kumalos. Arthur Jarvis, murdered by Absalom Kumalo. He is the son of James Jarvis. He had many liberal racial views that are highly significant and influential. His name first appears in the novel after he has been murdered, but he is a powerful presence whose legacy hovers over the whole novel. An engineer and first advocate for justice for Black South Africans. We have also Dubula, a big man who was the heart of anything and everything Arthur Jarvis did, including wanting peace between the races. Mr. Carmichael, Absalom's lawyer, he takes his case pro Dio for God, in this case meaning for free. Father Vincent, a priest from England who helps Stephen in his troubles, an Anglican priest from England who stays at the Sophia Town Mission. He counsels Kumalo when he is broken-hearted over his son and presides over the wedding between Absalom and Absalom's girlfriend. Mrs. Litheby, a native housewife in whose house Stephen stays while in Johannesburg. She is an old woman who is kind and giving, believing that the reason for life is to help others. The Harrisons, a father and son who represent two opposing views concerning the racial problem. The girl, who is Absalom's wife, a teenage girl approximately 16 years old, impregnated by Absalom, whom she later marries. Conflict, the internal conflict. Stephen Kumalo experiences conflict and hardships throughout the novel, largely on a personal level. Kumalo is shown struggling to piece back together with people and issues that continue to fall apart. The novel focuses on the deterioration of his family and tribe but also can stand but for a larger debasement, that of an entire country. Kumalo faces hatred, fear, oppression, and compromise, forces that are ripping his people and land apart. Person conflict. It is the confrontation between Absalom Kumalo and Arthur Jarvis. Absalom has broken into Arthur's home into it, and Arthur surprises him during the invasion. The scared Absalom fires his gun, and Arthur is killed, resolving this conflict, but leading to many more for Absalom. Some other examples from the novel are Stephen Absalom and James Jarvis encounter, and John Absalom and Stephen Absalom's confrontation. Person versus society. Absalom is up against the justice system as he fights the charges against him. The themes. Cry the Beloved Country is a social protest against the structures of the society that would later give rise to apartheid. Patton attempts to create an unbiased and objective view of the dichotomies it entails. He depicts whites as affected by native crime, while blacks suffer from social instability and moral issues due to the breakdown of the tribal system. It shows many of the problems with South Africa, such as the degrading of the land reserved for the natives, which is sometimes considered to be the main theme. The disintegration of the tribal community, native crime, and the fight to urban areas. Another prevalent theme in Cry, The Beloved Country, is the detrimental effects of fear on the characters and society of South of Africa. There are also sub-themes like inequality, economic disparity, erosion of social group. For the settings, Endocheni is a poor agricultural village with a strong sense of community and a spiritual connection. Johannesburg is known as Joburg, or the City of Gold, the largest city in South Africa, classified as a mega city as in one of the 50 largest urban areas in the world. It is the provincial capital and largest city of Gauteng, which is the wealthiest province in South Africa. And of course, this literary piece is written during the time in which apartheid was being conceptualized. Point of view. It is in the third person omniscient narration. The narrator mainly stayed focused on the internal world of Stephen Komalo and also dips into the minds of a variety of other characters, particularly James Jarvis, beginning in book 2. The tone and mood, because there are tragic parts, of course, we have emotional pain, the pain of being left behind by your loved ones, the disappointment of the situations in society, or in case of Stephen Kumalo in his village, and shared pain between Jarvis and Kumalo. What are the notable contributions of this literary piece? It depicted the truth of South Africa's real-life societal issues. Though Patton's novel helped raise the social consciousness of white South Africa, things got much worse before they got better. In 1948, the National Party, representing Afrikaner and conservative interests, gained power and introduced apartheid. Under apartheid, every South African was classified according to race, and the Group Areas Act enforced the physical separation of blacks from whites. Every aspect of South African life was racially segregated. Under the leadership of Nelson Mandela, the African National Congress ANC, which had been founded in 1912 as the South African National Congress and renamed in 1923, began protests against the new laws in the form of strikes and marches. After decades of struggle and bloodshed, the ANC prevailed and South Africa held its free election in 1994. Mandela was elected president, apartheid was dismantled, and the country ratified one of the most liberal constitutions in the world. Another, it brought international attention to South Africa's tragic history, and it also opened discussions and debates about racial discrimination. What are my personal impressions about this literary piece? The novel is a force that encapsulates the spiritual value, the timeliness and timelessness, and the nationalistic essence of the story. Second, it can be integrated to social science classes, specifically in making sense of the Black Lives Matter movement or exploring the the ideologies of racial discrimination or racial segregation that exists or still stains our uh, world mindset. Third, this story is the full package as it encompasses the most important things in life that we consider: love for the family, love for the country, and love for God. And to end, I would like to read a quote from the late South African President Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Thank you for listening. God bless everybody.